March 1943. A British Home Guard volunteer stands in a muddy field outside Nottingham, holding what looks like a child's improvised toy, a metal canister wrapped in sticky fabric, attached to a wooden handle that resembles something cobbled together in a garden shed. He approaches a derelict lorry, raises the device above his head, and brings it down against the vehicle's side with a dull thump. The adhesive makes contact. He yanks the handle away and runs. 7 seconds later, the explosion tears through the metal body with such force that shrapnel embeds itself in trees 20 meters away. This crude-looking contraption, officially designated the Grenade Hand Anti-Tank No. 74, would become known simply as the sticky bomb. And despite its almost comical appearance, it would evolve into one of the most psychologically terrifying weapons German soldiers faced on the Western Front. Not because of what it was designed to do, but because of what it accidentally became. The sticky bomb began as a solution to a specific problem and ended as something entirely different. Its journey from desperate improvisation to feared close-quarters weapon reveals how warfare's chaos can transform even the most unlikely objects into instruments that haunt the nightmares of professional soldiers. What the British military intended as a last resort anti-tank device accidentally became a weapon that German infantry feared more than artillery barrages, and its legacy would influence anti-armour tactics for decades after the war ended. By early 1940, Britain faced an invasion threat unlike anything in its modern history. The fall of France had demonstrated German armoured tactics with devastating clarity, and British defences were woefully inadequate. The Home Guard, initially called the Local Defence Volunteers, numbered over 1 million men, but they possessed virtually no effective anti-tank weapons. The Boy's anti-tank rifle, the standard issue, could barely penetrate the armour of Germany's Panzer III, and the situation grew more desperate with each intelligence report of heavier tanks entering German service. Existing anti-tank mines were in catastrophically short supply, and manufacturing capacity was stretched beyond breaking point, producing weapons for the regular army. The mathematics were stark and terrifying. Intelligence estimates suggested a German invasion force could deploy up to 2,000 tanks in the first wave. Britain possessed perhaps 300 viable anti-tank guns to defend the entire southern coast, and most were positioned at ports and airfields. The Home Guard had nothing, absolutely nothing, that could stop a panzer at close range. Officers calculated that even if every Boy's rifle performed perfectly, and combat reports from France suggested they rarely did, the stopping power was insufficient against frontal armour. Something had to be created, and it had to be created immediately, using materials and manufacturing processes that wouldn't compete with the production of conventional weapons. The solution had to be simple enough for civilian volunteers to use, cheap enough to produce in enormous quantities, and effective enough to give lightly trained men a fighting chance against professional tank crews. It seemed an impossible requirement. The answer came from an unlikely source: Major Millis Jeffress and his team at MIRC, the Ministry of Supply's Experimental Weapons Department, working from a converted hotel called the Firs in Whitchurch, Buckinghamshire. Jeffress, an engineer with a talent for unorthodox solutions, had been experimenting with adhesive explosives since 1940. His concept was brutally simple. If you couldn't penetrate tank armour from a distance, you needed to attach explosives directly to the vehicle's surface at close range. The challenge was creating an adhesive that would stick to the dusty, muddy, often rain-soaked surfaces of operational tanks whilst remaining stable enough not to detonate prematurely. The design that emerged looked absurd. A glass sphere roughly the size of a cricket ball, filled with approximately 1 kilogram of nitroglycerin, surrounded by a fabric covering treated with an extremely sticky adhesive compound based on natural latex. This sphere was mounted on a wooden handle approximately 40 centimeters long, and the entire assembly was protected by two metal hemispheres that screwed together. To use it, the operator unscrewed and removed the protective covers, exposing the sticky surface, raised the device overhead, and struck the target surface hard enough to ensure adhesion. The handle then detached via a deliberate weak point, leaving the bomb stuck to the target. A 5-second fuse initiated by the breaking of a chemical vial when the handle separated gave the user time to escape before detonation. Manufacturing took place at various facilities across Britain, though exact production locations remain partially classified. The glass spheres were blown at existing glassworks. The adhesive compound mixed at chemical plants that normally produced industrial adhesives, and final assembly occurred at small workshops that could be quickly converted from civilian production. Estimates suggest somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 sticky bombs were manufactured between 1940 and 1943, though precise figures were never publicly released and many records were destroyed after the war. Each unit cost approximately 7 shillings to produce, roughly equivalent to a day's wages for a skilled worker, making them extraordinarily cheap compared to conventional anti-tank weapons that cost hundreds of pounds per unit. The weapon's technical specifications reveal its crude effectiveness. The explosive charge, whilst modest by artillery standards, concentrated its force across a relatively small contact area, roughly equivalent to the striking surface of a dinner plate. When detonated against vertical armour, it could penetrate up to 15 millimeters of steel plate, sufficient to breach the side or rear armour of most German tanks operating in 1940 and 1941. The adhesive, when properly applied, generated a bond strength of approximately 50 kilograms per square centimetre, meaning a properly stuck bomb required significant force to remove. The 5-second fuse was deliberately short, long enough for escape but too short for an alert tank crew to remove the device before detonation. Operational deployment began in summer 1940, distributed to Home Guard units across southern England as part of invasion defence preparations. Training was minimal. Officers demonstrated the technique on derelict vehicles, and men practiced with dummy versions filled with sand. The official doctrine was clear. Sticky bombs were last resort weapons for use against tanks that had broken through primary defences. The user was expected to approach from cover, strike the vehicle's side or rear, and withdraw immediately. Survival was considered possible, but not guaranteed. Home Guard training manuals from the period make sobering reading, with phrases like "accept casualties" and "sacrifice may be necessary" appearing with uncomfortable frequency. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. But the sticky bomb story took an unexpected turn when regular British Army units began using it in combat, and not in the role intended. North Africa, 1941 and 1942 saw British infantry facing German tanks in close-quarters urban combat situations, where the weapon's design created effects nobody had anticipated. The psychological impact proved far more significant than the physical damage. German soldiers reported intense fear of the sticky bomb, not because of its explosive power, but because of the horror of something adhering to their vehicle, and by extension, potentially to their bodies, with a substance they couldn't quickly remove. Tank crews in particular developed an almost pathological dread of the weapon after witnessing comrades desperately trying to scrape adhered bombs off their vehicles in the seconds before detonation. Reports from German prisoners and captured documents reveal consistent themes. Tank commanders began refusing to advance through narrow streets where British infantry might be concealed at close range. Crews developed elaborate rituals for coating their vehicles with mud, dust, or even engine oil in the belief, often mistaken, that these would prevent the adhesive from bonding. Some crews carried scrapers or crowbars specifically to remove sticky bombs, wasting valuable seconds that made them vulnerable to other weapons. The terror was disproportionate to the actual threat, but terror rarely operates rationally. What began as a crude expedient for home guard defense had accidentally become an urban warfare nightmare. The weapon saw service in Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy, though by 1943 it was being gradually replaced by more sophisticated shaped charge weapons like the Piat. Nevertheless, its psychological legacy persisted. German training manuals from late 1943 and 1944 devoted entire sections to countering adhesive explosive devices, testimony to the fear they had generated. The sticky bomb had achieved something remarkable. It had made professional German tank crews afraid of individual British infantrymen at close range, fundamentally altering tactical approaches to urban combat. Comparing the sticky bomb to German equivalents reveals interesting contrasts. The Germans developed their own magnetic anti-tank charges, the Hafthochladung, which were technically superior, using magnets rather than adhesive and employing shape charge technology for better penetration. However, these required the target surface to be ferromagnetic and relatively clean, conditions rarely met in actual combat. The German devices were more sophisticated but less flexible. American forces examined sticky bombs but rejected them in favor of bazookas and other standoff weapons, reflecting a different tactical philosophy that prioritized crew survivability over close-quarters effectiveness. The weapon's influence extended beyond its immediate tactical application. The concept of adhesive explosives influenced post-war limpet mine development for special operations. The psychological insight, that fear of something adhering to equipment or personnel, could be as effective as actual damage, shaped thinking about weapons designed to create terror rather than casualties. The sticky bomb demonstrated that improvised-looking weapons could have psychological impacts far exceeding their material capabilities, a lesson that would prove relevant in asymmetric conflicts decades later. Today, surviving examples exist in military museums across Britain, including the Imperial War Museum London and the Royal Armouries. Examining them in their display cases, they still look absurd, more like props from a children's adventure story than serious military equipment. The wooden handles show wear from countless training sessions, the metal covers are dented and scratched, and the whole assembly has an unmistakably makeshift quality. Yet these objects terrified experienced soldiers, altered tactical doctrines, and forced enemy forces to change their approach to urban warfare. The sticky bomb's legacy is inseparable from its accidental nature. Nobody designed it to be a terror weapon. It was meant to be a last-ditch anti-tank measure for desperate circumstances. Its transformation into something that haunted German nightmares occurred organically, through the chaos of combat and the unpredictable psychology of fear. The weapon succeeded not because of brilliant engineering or revolutionary technology, but because it accidentally struck at something fundamental: the horror of being unable to remove a threat you know is about to kill you. That makeshift device, cobbled together from glass spheres, industrial adhesive, and wooden handles, became something its creators never imagined. It began as a toy-like improvisation, born from desperate necessity, and ended as a weapon that made hardened soldiers refuse to advance through urban terrain. The British hadn't set out to create psychological warfare. They'd simply needed something, anything, that might stop a tank. What they accidentally created was far more effective than they dared hope, not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it made men fear. The Home Guardsman in that Nottingham field was testing a device meant to defend Britain from invasion. He had no idea he was holding something that would terrify German tank crews from Tunisia to Rome. Sometimes the most feared weapons aren't the most sophisticated ones. Sometimes they're just the ones that stick.